It's time for another edition of Lewis at Large, 60 minutes of smart talk radio featuring guests from all walks of life in conversation with your host, Warner Lewis. So sit back and lend us your ears for the next hour. Now here with today's first guest is the host of Lewis at Large, Warner Lewis.
Well, welcome, everybody, to another edition of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck. And as always, some smart talk radio is in your future in this segment. Extremely pleased to have Torre Derouche with us. Who is she? Well, she is a worrier. Good for her. So am I. She is also a prolific writer, having written for The Atlantic, The Guardian, amongst other things, and a brand new work called The Warrior's Guide to the End of the World. And why not? Should be a good conversation indeed. From far overseas, Torre, how are you, my friend?
I am good. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, we have not had anybody talking quite about the end of the world quite specifically yet, but gosh knows in this day and age, who knows? Let's do this. Let's give our Lewis at Large listeners, if we could, a little bit more setup about you. You're a writer. You're also interested, obviously, in travel. But share us a little bit about how you got into writing and tell us some of the kinds of things you have written about in the past.
Sure. So my first career was in visual communications. I actually didn't intend to become a writer, but when I was in my mid-20s, I decided to move from Melbourne, my home in Melbourne, to San Francisco for a year just to work there and have kind of a bit of a gap year. And I met a guy there who was sailing around the world, and I started a relationship with him and ended up sort of going on this journey with him across the Pacific Ocean, which ended up becoming the subject for my first book called Love with a Chance of Drowning. So I lived out this adventure, and I felt very compelled to tell the story, and pictures, which was, what I worked with in my career in graphic design, just wouldn't suffice to tell the story. So I ended up turning to words, and then that relationship fell apart, and it was a kind of an awkward time because I was launching the book, but the relationship was ending, and my dad was very sick, and I ended up in this falling in a heap, and then I ended up going overseas by myself and traveling around Europe and sort of just looking for something to believe in again after all this loss. And that's the beginning of this new book, The Warrior's Guide to the End of the World, about overcoming grief and heartbreak and a lifetime of chronic worry.
I got a question for you, and we're going to talk about your travel for sure and talk about the book, but just in your opinion, what is the reward for anxiety from where you sit? What is that reward? What reward do you get, and what do you think others that suffer from sort of chronic anxiety get?
I think anxiety gives you hypervigilance and hyper-awareness, and it makes you very sensitive, and it makes you very perceptive, and it's a low quality of life a lot of the time, I think, to live with anxiety, but you see things like 4 or 5 steps ahead of everybody else because you're always looking, and it's almost a little bit of a superpower for that reason. You're able to say, such and such is about to happen, and everybody else is like, come on, stop worrying, what are you talking about? And then lo and behold, it happens. So yeah, I think that's a little bit of a reward of it all.
And I've heard before, somewhere along the line, that worry is about the past, anxiety is about the future. Do you agree with that one?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I think worry is a kind of a rumination and dwelling and depression and all those sort of heavy feelings, whereas anxiety is hyperactive and, almost like a coffee high where your body's just buzzing and you're anticipating.
It has been also speculated, and probably borne out, that a lot of the creative types, be it comedians, writers, actors, etc., that anxiety, stress, traumatic life events, etc., have had a decided part in their psychological chemistry. Would you agree with that? And if so, how does it play into yours?
I think that's probably true. I've heard that before as well. I would say that, like I said, about giving you this hypervigilance and this hyper-awareness and sort of depth of perception, that then leads to creative endeavors. But also, turning it into something like a piece of art is a way, it's a catharsis. It's a way to make something of an otherwise unpleasant situation. So I think that's probably why you find that a lot of anxious people are writers and artists in general.
So let's move towards the book, The Warrior's Guide to the End of the World. Talk to us a little bit about the physical journey that you took. Again, you met somebody, and they convinced you to have a little red wine, I suppose, and one thing led to another. So take us at least on the beginning of the journey.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, I was wandering around Europe just looking for something to believe in again, and not really with any particular plan in place, when I crossed paths with this woman I'd met one other time at a networking conference named Masha. And she was in the middle of walking around the world on her own, doing a series of pilgrimages. And she said to me, we went and had wine together, and she said to me, you should come walking with me. And I wasn't fit, and she was walking 8 hours a day. I didn't have any of the gear or anything ready to go for such a big adventure. But she said, just come for a day or two. It'll be really easy. So I thought, what's a day? I can do a day. And I decided to just start walking with her from a little town near Milan. And I was wearing these terrible street shoes, just made of cloth, and I started to get this twinge in my ankle, but it was such a nice walk, and we were having such excellent conversation, and she was such a beautiful person, and this friendship was deepening and deepening, and we were walking through this stunning Italian countryside, and I just didn't want to stop walking, so I kept walking, for 1 day, and then 2 days, and then 3 days, and then I got tendinitis, this terrible case of tendinitis from wearing these shoes. So I laid in a hotel for 5 days trying to get better, but my foot wouldn't heal, but I wanted to keep going. So I bought this rusty old bike and just decided to keep rolling along beside her, squeaking my brakes just to keep pace with her. And so it continued that way. And Italy is this magical place, especially by foot. You can eat all the food you want and not put on any weight. And it's just all vineyards and fruit trees and, rolling green hills. And so we had this beautiful time. And then we made this decision together to walk through India, thinking we've got this down. Let's go and do this in India. So then we traveled together to India to walk 3 weeks in the footsteps of Gandhi, his political march to the sea. And that was a very different story to Italy because it's an incredibly dangerous country already for women. We did have a male guide with us, but he was not really quite what we expected in terms of sort of looking out for us. And every day we were faced with, just trucks barreling straight at us as we walked along these skinny little shoulders of the highways, and there was dead animals everywhere, and the living conditions were obviously, very difficult. But in terms of a hiking adventure, it wasn't exactly John Muir's woods. So, yeah, that's pretty much the story. I mean, the second adventure through India was really just having to sort of confront, trying to find a way to be okay or find peace within myself as an anxiety sufferer in the most trying situation you could possibly imagine.
If you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis, of course, from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio, as we're here each and every week. This week, we're talking to Torre Derouche. She is an author, prolific one at that, with blogging and also with articles in The Atlantic, The Guardian, amongst others. A brand new work called The Warrior's Guide to the End of the World. I suppose some of our listeners are thinking, okay, Torre, how's all this subsidized? Who can afford to walk around the world? Tell us about that.
Well, I'm a freelancer, so that helps. It gives me mobility. I do design work, so I build websites, and I also do freelance writing as well, and they're both very portable careers. So That's allowed me a lot of freedom with travel, but walking is also not a very expensive way to see the world. I think from memory in Europe, we were spending, maybe $30 US a day. Accommodation was by donation. These pilgrimages are set up for religious pilgrims. I mean, you don't have to belong to any specific religion, but they're set up with facilities along the way. And so you stay in convents and you stay in churches and you just pay in a donation. And a lot of the times they will feed you as part of, just out of generosity. And then you really just need to find something to eat during the day. But in Italy, there's a lot of fruit trees everywhere, so that's also an option as well. But it's really, I think it's a most beautiful way to see the world, because if you have the facilities, if you're able-bodied, it's cheap and you're so up close with everything. You really you can smell everything. You see the landscape change. You feel the weather on you. And it's so intimate. It's such an intimate way to know your environment.
What about, how long did the journey take you?
For Italy, we traveled for about 3 weeks together, and India the same. I think India was 23 days long.
What did you, obviously, along the way you stopped, you talked to all kinds of people, either in larger cities or in villages or in roadside little encampments. What was the main thing that you came away from in terms of just the inhabitants of the planet Earth? What was on their mind? What did they have in common with one another? And maybe also where did their thoughts and philosophies differ?
Yeah, I love that question, because I think, as a chronic worrier, as somebody with terrible anxiety, I believe the worst of the news, and I'm afraid of strangers, and you imagine this very, dark and scary world where people are out to get you and out to kill you, and, that's kind of the narrative we get fed from a lot of media. But it always amazes me in these situations when I've traveled in these unconventional ways and pushed past that fear, that people are just so generous. I think that what we all share in common is that we all, in our heart, want to help other people succeed. We want to see people triumph. So we would walk through towns and people would, complete strangers would give us food, or they'd give us water, or they'd, they'd give us directions or helpful tips. The number of people ready to just come out and guide us or help us in any way they could was overwhelming, to the point where in India we were having to turn down generosity constantly. People were saying, come and have chai with us, or come and have lunch with us, and we will cook you lunch. And, oh, no, we've already eaten, or we're in a rush, we can't stop and drink tea right now. But we had so many invitations like this, and so many just big-hearted people wanting to chat to us and help us along. So it's quite beautiful.
So was your general impression, I think I know the answer to this, but are you encouraged about the future of this planet, or are you discouraged, or are you a little bit of both?
It's a very big question. Look, I'm encouraged in terms of humanity. I think, like I said, I think that we get fed a particular story about the way people are, and I think that in truth, there are some bad people out there. It's not, there are monsters, but they're few and far between. Overwhelmingly, people are loving, and they care about the same things as you and I. They care about their family. They care about belonging. And a lot of the time, even people doing bad things, they are being led by their own fears. Like they're doing stuff in reaction to fear. And so, I do have a lot of faith in humanity, and I have a lot of faith, in our ability to be there for each other. But I do think that, just empathizing is a really good place to start, and understanding that things aren't as scary and terrible as maybe we are being led to believe.
What about have you talked to either writers or others that have had a similar journey such as yours?
Yes, I have. Yep, I have. Actually, before I set out through India, I got in contact with a number of bloggers, women who had travelled through India alone, just to check that it was okay and safe, and all their opinions were, yep, you'll be fine. I had no problems. So, yeah, I have.
What about, again, this provided you fodder, obviously, for the book, The Warrior's Guide to the End of the World. But has it provided you also maybe some motivation to walk North America or South America or another continent or other countries?
Absolutely. At this point, after having traveled in that way, I feel like traveling any other way is too quick. And I mean, it's like I said before, it's such a perfect way to experience an environment and to be with the people of that environment. And it's so low impact. You're not creating any kind of damage to your environment, really. And so that's how I want to travel, from this point. So long as I have my body can do the work, I would love to continue to see the world that way.
What about, so if you're standing up in front of a group of people, and for our listeners, tell us advice on should we do something similar? And if we do, what kind of planning do we need to do, and what should we expect, and what kinds of expectations should we have?
Okay. Well, yes, I think people should do it. Like I say, if you are able to, which not everybody is, but if you are, there's something just so special about embracing the fact that you're able to do that right now. There will come a time in all of our lives where our bodies no longer can do that and can no longer see the world that way. So as long as you have that facility, I would say do it. You can, like I said, you can eat everything you want. You can eat multiple big meals per day and not put, you're still losing weight every day just because of the amount of work your body's doing. And I think that's pretty special. So planning, it depends where you go. There's a lot of resources out there online for every pilgrimage. The most popular one, I guess, that people are doing is the Camino de Santiago in Spain, which is a month-long pilgrimage. And that one, you'll find tons of resources about that. Others, similarly, you just start sort of Googling it, and it depends on which part of the world you want to go to, and you can look at long hikes or pilgrimages in those areas, and each one's going to have a different set of circumstances to it and different amounts of planning. But for something like the one I did in Italy, that one, and also same with the Camino de Santiago in Spain, because it's so well set up already for pilgrims, you don't need to carry much with you. You carry maybe 5 to 10 kilos, which I think is, 5 pounds? In a little backpack, and you just need really good shoes, and maybe hiking poles to help you along, and then you're eating the whole way. There's little places to stop constantly, restaurants and so on, that you stop at and eat at. And then there's guidebooks and stuff like that tell you how long between towns and how long you have to walk until you get to your next accommodation. And there in the accommodation will be the bedding and, general facilities for you to get by. So you don't actually, unlike hiking, say, the Appalachian, you don't need to carry a huge bag on your back with everything in it. You just need a small amount, a change of clothes and some basic toiletries and that sort of thing. So it's kind of it's a much easier way to walk than a full wilderness hike.
Right. Well, it is a fascinating concept by a writer that is loaded with anxiety and angst and anticipation at the same time. A neat combination. The work is called The Warrior's Guide to the End of the World by Torre Derouche. Torre, how can people, our listeners, find out more and read some of the prior works that you've done and also maybe pick up a copy of the book?
So I have a blog, fearfuladventurer.com, and my writing is on there. So if you want a little snippet of my work, you can read it there. And in terms of buying the book, it should be available in bookstores around the country and through Amazon. But if fearfuladventurer.com, you'll get all the links and everything else right there.
Okay, well, so what's your next adventure?
It's a good question. It's funny, after doing these 2 pilgrimages, I felt so nourished and full on experience and different cultures that I was so ready to just come home and nest in Melbourne, and that's what I've done. And it's been 3 years now since I finished that trip, and every now and again I look at flights to different countries and I think, I'm really enjoying Melbourne. I'm really enjoying just being here. But I think I will probably, I actually really want to do the Camino de Santiago with my mum, but my mum's had a knee issue. She's in her mid-60s, so she has to get a surgery, and then after she does that, we can see whether or not she's able to do it.
All right, well, I want to suggest you come and you walk from San Francisco or the middle of California to somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. Walk right across the United States, and you can stop right in our town of Lawrence, Kansas, and we're right smack in the middle. And we'll give you a wonderful cup of coffee here and a nice breakfast or lunch and send you on your way. How about that?
That sounds so worth it.
Okay.
I will walk all that way just to meet you and have that coffee.
Indeed. Listen, thank you so much, and would love to have you on again the next time you do an adventure, and love to hear about it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been nice chatting.
You bet. We will be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.